Hi, everyone. It's great to see people coming to welcome back one of our own, Elaine Hsieh Chou, who graduated from UCI in 2009 in English. And she did creative writing here as well as literature, and she was in one of my classes. So it is super exciting for me to have Elaine here. I am greeting you on behalf of Illuminations, the Chancellor's Arts and Culture Initiative. And this is part of our UCI Authors Series, which is a remote series that features UCI faculty, students, alumni, and staff who have written exciting and interesting books that are impacting our culture. And Disorientation is one of those books. So Elaine is a Taiwanese American writer from California, as well as an anteater. She is a 2017 Rana Jaffe Foundation Graduate Fellow at NYU, and she was also a 2021 NYSCA NYFA Artist Fellow. And her short fiction has appeared in Black Warrior Review, Guernica, Tin House Online, and Plowshares. And Disorientation is her first novel. So hi, Elaine. Do you want to come in and say hi to everyone?
Hello, everyone. Hi, Julia. Thank you so much for having me.
We're just so excited. I really enjoyed reading this book and just thinking about it. It is an academic book. It's a book that takes place in a graduate program. It involves a graduate student who's having a dissertation problem. And so it kind of resonated for me with a lot of issues around academic culture, graduate student life, but very much told from the perspective of a young Asian American woman. And so it adds something distinctive to the genre of the academic novel, which began life as something very tweedy and Northeastern and male. And
right.
Really takes a very different form in this book, but because you're drawing on that sort of academic novel genre, but there's also sleuthing. So there's a little bit of a kind of a Nancy Drew quality to some of it, and there's a girlfriend's quality to some of it, and it's doing a lot of different things. It's really very inventive, and some of it's very funny and veers towards satire, and other parts get very serious and reflective. There's addiction in here. I mean, you really address a lot of different issues that are affecting our culture and young people of your generation, especially. So it's really very thoughtful. And I can see from the list of our guests that we have a lot of students here, as well as staff and some faculty and community members. And I think all of them are going to have their own questions for you. But I think our students, especially the ones who are aspiring to become writers, and I think this book will really resonate for them. So please, everybody, don't forget to order your copy of Disorientation. So what we're going to do today, folks, is that Elaine has generously agreed to read about 5 to 7 to 8 minutes from her novel. The novel does have a lot of interesting plot turns, and I've asked her not to do any reveals, but my questions will really be more about the world building that she does in this novel rather than about the plot itself, because you really need to read it and get drawn into the drama of it, because it really is quite exciting. It has a plot as well as a world. And then I have some questions for Elaine, and I'm sure that members of our audience will also have some questions for Elaine. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. So Elaine.
Thank you, Julia. That was such a nice introduction, and it's so cool to know there are all these anteaters in the crowd. Hello, everyone. I'm going to read from chapter 2. So this is not giving away anything. All you need to know is that Ingrid, our protagonist, she's a 29-year-old PhD student, and she's engaged to a white translator named Stephen Green. Okay, so we're going to talk about yeah, sort of her relationship with Stephen and her ex-boyfriends. By all accounts, Stephen Green was plain. He had a plain, thin face and plain brown hair. He wore plain glasses and preferred plain clothes paired with plain, unpatterned socks. He had the face of an unremarkable passerby, or when he stood in shadowy lighting, of someone on the sex offender registry. But to Ingrid, he was perfect. She loved Stephen's generic features and droning public radio voice, the way he only ate sugar-free cereal and color-coordinated his pencil drawer. She was uncertain about many things in life, but she knew with utmost certainty that she and Stephen, they were meant to be. This belief had scientific backing. After inputting their preferences for age, race, location, education, and interests, an online algorithm had matched them together with a 98% success rate. Prior to Stephen, Ingrid had experienced such bad luck with men, she felt fated to be alone for the rest of her life. Although the idea of being her own significant other had a certain appeal, Ingrid harbored an innate need to attach herself to someone like a pathogen to a host. Perhaps therein lay the problem. Her ex-boyfriends had called her hurtful names like clingy and codependent. Her first boyfriend, the film studies major, used to disappear on her for weeks at a time with nary a text message. She had to resort to temporarily changing her major in order to take the same classes as him. When she confronted him in Advanced Film Theory 101, he went into a rage, calling her hysterical and threatening to file a restraining order against her. But then he showed up outside her dorm room at 4 a.m, saying if she didn't take him back, he would start using again prescription Adderall. And would she forgive him? She forgave him. Afterwards came the engineering grad student who had also been her TA for a general education requirement. On their first date, while she mopped up the semen on her stomach, he cried and confessed he'd never gotten over his first love. Ingrid was touched by his sensitivity. The engineering grad student had an impressive sex drive. Every single time he saw her, he wanted to have sex. His favorite position was gripping her around the throat while her limbs flailed in every direction. She once made the mistake of telling him she wasn't in the mood and she was afraid it would hurt, and he sobbed for an hour straight, rocking back and forth on the bed, whimpering that her rejection of him made him feel unlovable, which brought back all of his abandonment issues stemming from his stepmom leaving his dad when he was 16. She never made the mistake of saying no to him again. Next was the investment banker, who she'd met through a blind date forced upon her by an acquaintance. He had a kink for watching porn together before they had sex, while they had sex, and sometimes after they had sex. Ingrid always had trouble getting lost in the commotion on screen. She was distracted by the soundtrack and set design choices, which she blamed on her introductory dip into film studies. But she said nothing. She'd never shame him for having a kink. She wasn't a Republican. The relationship ended briefly when she walked in on him during a blindfolded orgy, but the investment banker disclosed that his commitment issues originated from his stepmom leaving his dad when he was 16, so he couldn't be held responsible for his behavior. The relationship ended permanently when he broke up with Ingrid, citing that he just didn't feel the same way he used to about her. But could she return the $300 blender he had bought her? Because, well, it wasn't really fair for her to keep now that the relationship was over, was it? And they were still good friends, weren't they? She gave it back and emailed him the warranty. The finale to her season of dating was the medical resident. He and Ingrid met by chance, just like in the movies, she turning around and splattering her coffee across his pale green scrubs, he waving it off and asking her to dinner that night. They fell into each other like two bodies of water after a dam is lifted. He was the first boyfriend who pronounced "I love you" while neither drunk nor drugged nor in the midst of ejaculation. Ingrid too loved him intensely and obsessively. The medical resident explained love was the reason why Ingrid forced him to act the way he did. He made this known by having her list why she loved him, how she had failed to show it, and how she would prove it, mostly while on her hands and knees, though sometimes he allowed her to remain standing against the wall. He occasionally locked Ingrid inside his bathroom, having reversed the lock system, when she had done something unacceptable, like failing to inform him of her whereabouts after nightfall. He was also fond of projectile throwing objects and screaming into her face, spraying spittle across her cheeks, which he somehow managed to do only when his neighbors were out. Then one night, when he smacked her so hard she hit the edge of the entertainment console and passed out, she could finally give a name to what he was doing to her and left. After that, Ingrid did not date anyone for a year and a half. She began to actively cultivate her spinster wardrobe and visit animal shelters, calculating that if she adopted a cat every 7 years, she'd accumulate a respectable number before menopause. When she registered on the dating website, it was half out of curiosity and half as a dare. She expected to smugly scroll through desperate profile after desperate profile, feeling reaffirmed spinsterhood was the correct and sensible path forward. But then she was matched with Stephen Green. Stephen, who believed in vanquishing toxic masculinity, who did not initiate conversation by demanding shaved or natural, who instead politely inquired after her dissertation topic, who traded literary quips with her for a full month before she got impatient and asked him out. Stephen, whose idea of a first date wasn't going back to his apartment to check out his DVD collection, which somehow always turned into a 45-minute blowjob, but attending a lecture on the short-eared gray owl native to Massachusetts. During that first date, they traced their similarities like a connect the dots picture. Stephen had grown up in a small New England town and was an only child. Likewise for Ingrid. His parents were both orthodontists, hers were both government bureaucratic workers. Both faithfully recycled, both dreamt of one day sponsoring a malnourished child in an impoverished, war-torn country. The more impoverished and war-torn, the better. Their interests, intellectual, cultural, political, aligned in comforting symmetry. Make no mistake, Stephen was not exceptional, save for the fact that he was exceptionally unexceptional. But Ingrid had tried men who worshiped their own testosterone, men who had personalities and egos the size of small countries. And look how that had gone. What she wanted now was someone safe and dependable, someone downright predictable. And who could be more predictable than Stephen Green? The man had used the same brand of hand lotion for over 11 years. Surely that sort of brand loyalty transferred over to more personal forms of loyalty. As they grew to know each other, Stephen always stressing he would follow Ingrid's pace when it came to physical intimacy. He had been a self-proclaimed feminist since 7th grade. What Ingrid appreciated most about him was his constant and unfailing benevolence. When frowning, Stephen looked thoughtfully concerned. When upset, like he had ingested one too many dairy products, he was lactose intolerant. He was incapable of raising his voice or slamming the door. It triggered his tinnitus. One got the feeling if he were caught in a fire, he would remain calmly smiling, even as the flames consumed his flesh. When a fire did break out in Stephen's building, and when he in fact calmly smiled as the flames melted a decade of work on his hard drive, that was when Ingrid knew for certain she could trust this man. Her heart, once thought permanently shuttered, reopened for business and let Stephen take up occupancy. Thank you.
Oh, wow. That's fun hearing that from early in the book now that I've read the whole book. Lots of things, I don't know, take on new meaning as they should, in a novel. So, a lot of stuff there. I mean, sounds like Stephen's the perfect boyfriend, but maybe there's already some warning signs there. How did you create this portrait of Stephen?
Well, I was really fascinated by this new figure that my friends in online dating, who've been online dating, have told me about, called the soft boy, SOFTBOI, which is sort of a new variation on the fuck boy, which was a more like aggressively macho, that whole toxic masculinity, like bro or jock type figure who's, just lies to women, tries to sleep around with as many women as possible. The soft boy has the same intentions, but he cloaks them in a sort of, I'm a wounded artist and I was bullied in elementary school and I'm a feminist, I write poetry, basically packages themselves as very unthreatening, even though, like we learn with Stephen, it's sort of like a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? So I was really fascinated by how abuse looks in a way that we don't typically associate it with, like Ingrid unfortunately has had experience with those type of men, like the medical resident who actually physically hurts her and forces her into these really horrible like physical enclosures. And it's really awful. So I think because we get that example of abuse, that Stephen, we just don't expect him to be anything but perfect. And I wanted to explore, how this sort of abuse in some ways, not that anyone is more dangerous than the other, they're all dangerous and horrible, but that this one often gets overlooked and gets a sort of pass because the signs are harder to tell. And these men are really good at manipulation and at presenting themselves as, victims themselves and non-threatening. And that with Stephen, I really just wanted to dig into and show how awful it can be.
Yeah, and that really just, it's very interesting. I just finished reading the novel this weekend, and so it's very interesting to hear that beginning again and see these warning signs. I also did not know about the soft boy as a type. I had forgotten that they had met through a dating app. The whole dating app thing is so interesting because people can create these personae, and the novel is in many ways about people creating personae that are deceptive and can have all these repercussions. And I don't want to say too much, but so that was really fascinating. The other thing, of course, about Stephen is that he is white or Caucasian, and that there's interesting stuff in there about the use of those terms. And a lot of your novel is about Asian women dating white guys and how Asian guys feel about it, and how the Asian women feel about their choices, and how Ingrid's own attitudes towards this shift at an important point. So can you tell us just a little bit about, like, from your generation, from where you sit, what you were exploring there, and what I don't want to say what your conclusions are, because it's a novel, not a sociology book, but what were you thinking about and wanting to share, wanting us to think about, and wanting your readers? And I think anyone can read this novel, but it is a young person's book in many ways. What do you want your generation to think about? What kind of conversations came out of this and are leading into with this material about interracial dating?
I love that we are jumping off with this question. I think sometimes people get a little nervous talking about it, but it's like, it's such a big part of the book, and we absolutely must talk about this. And I think it's a quote unquote phenomenon that people have noticed and have been remarked upon. And it's funny, doing this event at UCI, because my first year at UCI, so that was 2005, was the first time I had heard the term, quote, yellow fever. And it coincided with this YouTube video that had just come out, made by students at UC San Diego, Wong Fu Productions, who made this video about yellow fever. And it was the first time that I think at that point, so much of cultural discourse was different. I think for a lot of Asian femmes, this idea of being undesirable was so steep, so like entrenched in our heads, that this idea that we would be desirable was seen as something positive. And it was weird. I think it was at that point presented that way. And if a guy said, he has yellow fever, or if you knew this about him, it was, instead of being a red flag the way I think it is now in 2022, where you might run the opposite way, for some people, it was like, I got a shot with this person who 10 years ago, in elementary school or whatever, probably bullied me and would only go for my friend Brittany. So there's a lot of complicated feelings there about why someone like that, who perhaps was cruel or dismissive of Asians, would then later on, at age 18, only want to date them. And so then that gets into power and subjugation, and that's rooted in America's very dark history. And as I got older, and as the discourse began to shift, and truly in those years, from 2005, I guess, to now, so much changed. And I think finally people were talking about that racial fetishization in any shape or form always boils down to dehumanization. And I really wanted to talk about that, because I think in popular media, when I have seen people mention or nod to quote unquote yellow fever, all these white men going, just exclusively like targeting Asian women, it was seen as a joke. It wasn't taken seriously. Whereas to me, I was like, well, there are really serious repercussions. Dehumanizing someone does make it easier to harm them psychologically, physically, and there actually are studies that show elevated abuse in these types of interracial relationships. At least there's one study that shows that. And so to me, it was high time that we take it seriously. And I really wanted, like you said, like I can't come up with the solutions. I'm not a sociologist, even though in interviews I sort of have been asked, like, what do we do about this? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what do you want to go back to anti-miscegenation laws? Like, there's nothing we can. That is so dangerous territory to even suggest there's something one can do. I think what it comes down to is, let's talk about how fetishization is objectification and dehumanizing and othering and exotifying. And let's talk about also why it is that some people like Ingrid, when she was younger, completely disavowed Asian men. And so what is it about our culture, American culture, that has associated white men with, power, beauty, inherent goodness, and associated Asian women with submissiveness, obedience, hypersexuality? It's like, that's what I hope people sort of think about, is none of these things are created in a vacuum, right? It's like 200 years of a lot of careful maneuvering so that these stereotypes exist, and then they affect our real lives. So it's like a vicious circle, right?
Right. And because the novel is set in a university and has all of these graduate students writing dissertations on various topics, you're actually able to give little micro like PowerPoints. You have one scene where the character just like goes down like all these films and when they were appeared and what the names were and which women were presented this way. And like, it's really great. I mean, as an English professor, I love the way you can just get in, not only like the sort of the human dimension and the generational dimension, but also you can get in the history without it feeling foreign to it, because it's part of this research texture of the novel. So I thought that was great. We do have a question from someone on this topic, Rose Schroff, and she says, "Thank you for the reading and your analysis of Yellow Fever. I'm reminded of The Namesake, a novel by Jhumpa Lahiri. The protagonist, Nikhil Gogol, dated several white women, and I interpreted this as Nikhil exploring his own sexuality and his own South Asian American identity as a brown man. Would you say Ingrid is exploring her own sexuality and identity in the same way?" Maybe I would add to that. I think that's why you have Eunice, right? Like, because Eunice is more in control of these things and Ingrid's a little bit more victimized. So you're kind of, by having more than one character in the novel involved in interracial dating, you allow us, it's not like a monolithic thing. But anyway, if you could address Bear Rose's question, that would be great.
Yeah. I think, Julia, that's very astute. Yeah, Eunice is someone who I think she's dated all types of all ethnicities. But she's currently, like, when we meet her in the novel, she's dating this like white tech bro, Thad. It's like the worst name I could think of.
You enjoyed the names.
And yeah, to her, I think she's figuring out, can you separate this idea of claiming your own sexuality and sexual desire and, just being in control of your body from sort of the person that you're getting it from, because maybe she approaches it from a sort of neutral perspective of like, I'm just getting what I need from you. I don't have any emotional, social, like I don't want anything to do with you outside of the bedroom. but then who knows what is he getting from her? Is she fulfilling like an Asian fantasy? And then, so yeah, I think it would have been great if we could have gotten into that more in the novel. But I think, yeah, for Ingrid, her exploration, I think, is definitely with Alex. So Alex is Eunice's hot brother.
Hot Asian brother, right?
And I think the thing is, Ingrid, like most people, you're attracted to people, right? And so I think she's always been attracted to men of all ethnicities, but she really tried to square that away in terms of how she thought of survival in America. I think was she associated it with any sort of closeness to whiteness. So I think what she did was she suppressed a lot of that natural attraction. But, as things begin to fall apart in her world and her relationship falls apart with Stephen, she's like, oh, like, what are these feelings I have around Alex? Like, he annoys me. I'm flustered around him. I can't seem to talk around him, and then I think is exploring that she has this very obvious attraction. So I think that's why he's there. But Ingrid, yeah, there's not since she doesn't really date in this book, it's more like she's locked into this 5-year relationship. And it's like, will she get out? Yeah, so there's not that much that she, room for her to explore. Maybe in a sequel, like Ingrid goes back on in the dating world.
Because we leave her in a situation of repair, but we don't really know what she's going to do next.
Yeah.
There are other issues in the book besides dating and sexuality, but if people have questions about that, I know we've got a lot of people under 25 in this attendee list. Please put your questions or your comments about this issue into the Q&A, and we'll come back to that because I think it is part of what makes this novel very fresh and new. But the novel is not only about that, it's also about something called yellowface. And maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what that is, how you got interested in it, why you decided to write a novel that would really address this issue.
Yeah, this is fun to talk about because I actually haven't been able to talk about this yet. Like I've talked about in interviews, Michael Derrick Hudson, who was the white pope who pretended to be Yi-Fen Chao on paper to basically enter into a POC only anthology. And so he, of course, was like a big inspiration. But at the same time that this was happening in 2015, Rachel Dolezal burst onto the scene. And I think she was one of the first sort of that racial farce, the outing of one of these, actual changing of her phenotype, because we've had these problematic pen names, white people using Asian pen names before, but Rachel Dolezal really, she used spray tan, she used makeup, and she permed her hair to pass as Black in public. And I was, the nation, I mean, the world was in an outrage. And I couldn't get over sort of her defense of herself because it's so indefensible. But if you've watched any interviews with her, she fascinated me because she just commits so hard to this idea that she is Black, period. And she is transracial. She believes that that is a thing. And so like the first iteration of John Smith was more similar to Rachel, whereas he's just firmly is like, I'm Asian, I'm Chinese, I am transracial. But later on, I thought it was more interesting to make him into like, he really knows what he's doing. He knows it's wrong. And he's just this sort of troll, con artist. But the yellowface, I mean, I think it angered me that, while Asians and Asian Americans suffer such cruelty in the world, be that at the micro level or just pure violent attacks. And, we've been seeing this, it's always been there since, Chinese Americans arrived in the 1800s, but it's obviously spiked with false rhetoric around COVID. So to me, it's outrageous and infuriating that we suffer such cruelty, but then some people will want to still use our identity in a way to benefit them. And it's just so strange to live in this world where, you suffer this violence and racism, and yet some people see your race as a benefit, that somehow they can benefit from them. And Rachel Dolezal clearly, she tried to benefit from that. And in 2018, Jessica Krug was outed as a professor who pretended to be Black and I think Latinx as well, or she sort of combined them when slipping in and out. And there were more academics like outed that I thought was really fascinating, that they would specialize in their fake racial identity, which brings up this very interesting question of, in academia, this idea that, authenticity, like what is it? And I think these people, these professors, almost as if to get a leg up in their career, right? Where like, it's not enough that I just research, this topic or what, I must become this and have authority over it in that way. And so, yeah, I think there were so many things in the real world happening. I just couldn't stop thinking about it, and I had to write about it.
Yeah, that's great. And you also deal with yellow face on the stage. You have a theatrical performance in which a young white woman is cast as the Asian heroine, and there's some boycotting and some arguments about that and some debating. So what's your perspective on that, and what were you trying to do with that whole subplot?
Yeah, that just kept happening in real life too. So much of the book is everything happened basically. And there was the more like actual yellowface on stage is very common. And in productions all across the country and the world, if for example, Madame Butterfly is like one of the most popular operas ever. And it's very common that whoever plays that character, puts on like a sort of geisha costume and like white face makeup. But in other plays, like the Mikado, they also, like in this one performance, 40 white actors wore yellow face to perform in that. And there was more of the figurative stealing of Asian roles with, Scarlett Johansson with Ghost in the Shell. And what was the other one? Well, like Emma Stone in Aloha, who's supposed to be a quarter Asian. There was Tilda Swinton in Doctor Strange, I believe. But yeah, there was a moment around 2016 where it just felt like Asian Americans were seen as so insignificant. So as if our outrage was in itself meaningless, like it didn't change anything. No one cared if we were angry. No one cared if we had felt erased and disrespected. They were just like, instead of giving this role, this career-making role to an Asian actor, Scarlett Johansson, you have it. So yeah, that part of the novel around Chinatown Blues and all that, it was me, I think, trying to work out those real life issues and how people talked about it and how people try to justify it, but also how people felt hurt by it.
Yeah, that's great. And there's a comment here from Kirk Davis saying that Boston Lyric Opera has a butterfly project, that they've been tracking this issue in opera, especially around Madama Butterfly by Puccini. So
wow,
for that reference. There's also a lot here about families and immigrant families. And I was really moved as, a grown up with young adult children. I was really moved by the way in which you bring the parents into focus over the course of the book. And at the beginning, they're invisible, as parents often are to their children. They're cold, the father has been absent, the mother is not interested, whatever. And then, as the book progresses, like you make sense of those distances and those coolnesses and you hold Ingrid not accountable for her own behavior, but she becomes more cognizant of the role that she's played in pushing her parents away. And you allow that family to reach a new level of cooperation and understanding. And I found that very moving and kind of honest of you, and quite interesting. So if you could just tell me a little bit about the intergenerational story and what you were trying to do with that. And I'm really interested.
I mean, I think there are a lot of Asian American narratives and stories based around family. And I think, well, what I wanted to show was, Ingrid's family is not perfect, but I really wanted to move away from the whole withholding tiger parent stereotype of being ultra strict and like depriving your child of affection or whatever. I think because I think it's also very inaccurate. Like I think there are so many ways of Asian American family exists that we sort of only get one type often in media. And so with Ingrid's parents, I wanted to show that there is distance there, like you say, but a lot of it is not intentional. I think her parents both, obviously they really love her and have always supported her, but her dad had to work in Taiwan. So they just, growing up, he just wasn't there. And that's actually like very common too, that, to survive in this new country you move to, sometimes it's like, well, I can't even get a job here actually. And you end up sort of having to like go back, save up money, and Ingrid's mom then becomes a single mom for a long time. And she's so busy. She's just like never around because she's working, she studies for her associate's degree, she's has to juggle all these things that it's not her fault either that she can't be like a stay-at-home mom and just put all her attention on Ingrid. So Ingrid grows up, as she says in the book, not really knowing her parents. And then because they were, I think, her connection to her culture and to Taiwan, which she just completely wanted nothing to do with, I think in the sense that she just wanted to be like her friends who were all white. And so anything that set her apart that would make her different, she pushed away. And sadly, that connection to, for example, like language, that her parents would speak Mandarin or Taiwanese with each other, or and would try to speak it to her. Because she wanted to be like her friend, was like, don't speak, don't talk to me in Mandarin anymore. Like, we're just going to speak English now. And so it's so much of her relationship to her parents changes because she finally accepts where she's from and who she is. And, her no longer running away from that finally opens this door to like, your parents aren't just your parents. They're also your tie to this whole country and culture. And it's also important to note that like, we can form our own attachments to our, country of origin, and that doesn't have to be mediated through our parents. I recently like saw someone talking about that. I was like, yeah, that is important, that we should be able to strike out on our own and find our own connection, which I hope Ingrid does when she, visits eventually. But yeah, I wanted to explore as much as I could what I thought was a kind of relationship that exists that I wasn't reading about as much, which is so much love is there. And it's just sort of the circumstances of like society prevents them from getting close.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned Taiwan, and you definitely, the fact that Ingrid is a Taiwanese American comes up frequently in the book, and she's irritated when she's introduced as Chinese. We've just had a tragedy in Orange County with the Taiwan congregation being targeted with gun violence. Tell us a little bit about what Taiwan means in this novel, and what you're thinking, not you're thinking about the tragedy, which is kind of a whole nother issue, but it was interesting to me to be reading your novel while these events were unfolding, and to become more conscious of Taiwan in that context through your novel. So can you just tell us a little bit about Taiwan and what it means in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just don't see as much Taiwanese representation, like however we take that. That's such a broad, often, misconstrued term. But to me, I think it was important to just show that there is Ingrid. Well, it's a very short section, but she struggles with this feeling of, I think because she wants to distance herself from her culture, often she would mix that up with Chinese culture. So this idea of, getting to claim that she is Taiwanese, which she is, but it sort of explores also this problematic feeling that she has, that's she just wants to be accepted as much as possible. And in the book, there's such rampant anti-China rhetoric swirling around. In this one sort of madman has this petition called Yellow Peril 2.0, and he just hates China and the Chinese. And so Ingrid, in this section, she has to sort of grapple with, like, by saying to him, oh, you can't hate me because I'm not Chinese, I'm actually Taiwanese. It's I think it is this tricky space where it's like, are you forsaking, I just think it is it's so tricky to explore, but to me it was important to state that there are all these tensions, bottom line, right, that we don't really talk about, which is that even if a great grandparent immigrated from Taiwan, from China to Taiwan, can you still call yourself Taiwanese? You can be Taiwanese Aboriginal. And so is there a different term for that? There's all these different tensions between the different generations of Chinese immigrants that came to Taiwan, and at what point do they become Taiwanese? And within Taiwan, there are all these tensions between the political party that wants to retain relations with China, and the ones that want, the party that wants total independence. Within one family, you can have people on either side. And within the same family, you can have this feeling of, like, this on one side of the family, like, you're the oppressor. There's all this tension that we just don't often get remarked upon. And Ingrid, thinks about it a little. I guess, there's not that much space devoted to it, but I just wanted to at least acknowledge it, and just have her have that representation there, I guess, like someone on the page being, identifying as Taiwanese American. And as the book goes on, instead of using it as a way to avoid, in her head, stereotypes about being Chinese, which is hilarious because, like, white racists don't care if you're from China or Taiwan, which we see with this madman, that he doesn't care. Ingrid, I hope she moves away from that defensive position to actually embracing being Taiwanese, and hopefully eventually, I hope she discovers, like, all this, everything this country has to offer, because Taiwan's amazing. I love Taiwan. Everyone should visit Taiwan. I want independence for Taiwan. Now we're just getting into, like, not really talking about the books. Since I have the mic, free Taiwan. Okay.
So if you were to write a sequel, would she take that trip? And because Eunice, her best friend at the end of the book, this is not a spoiler, has gone back to Korea.
Yeah.
And they're kind of planning a trip. in which Ingrid will go to Taiwan. They'll go together to Taiwan and Korea.
Yeah.
So are you thinking about a sequel that will take up those travels? And what do you have in store for these young women?
I don't. It's hard for me to foresee a sequel, but sometimes I don't know. I just like to imagine in my head that they, yeah, that they have a great time, and that Ingrid, I think she would. There'd be so much space for her to grapple with new issues where she's in Taiwan, she no longer feels invisible necessarily, but then because she can't really speak Mandarin, um, let alone Taiwanese, then she's going to have to bump up against feeling like an outsider in that sense. And I think it would be really fun if she tried to date a Taiwanese guy and what that was like. Or maybe she would, yeah, in Taiwan, there are so many quote unquote sex pats. They're like the bane of the earth. Yeah, they're horrible. But it would be interesting if she sort of meets them, and what does she do about it? You know, like, does she try to embark on, I don't know, like a mission to expel them from Taiwan? I don't know. So even though I'm not sure I'll ever write this, I like, yeah, it's fun to think about and hear what readers sort of hope for Ingrid. And it's nice to have these possibilities for her in, opening up after the novel.
Yeah, and she keeps living with me in that way too. So I think that's the sign that the novel has kind of worked, is that these characters are alive, and I am imagining like what happens to the next, because you leave a lot of possibility open at the end. We have a question here from Rachel Wang, who's one of our English majors. And she says, "Hi, Ms. Chou. I'm also Taiwanese American. And I remember growing up that many people would correct me and tell me Taiwan doesn't exist, or it must mean Thailand, whenever I told them I was Taiwanese. Later on, for much of my childhood, I just went with telling people I was Chinese out of convenience. What do you think this does to someone, be it psychologically or in terms of identity formation? And what role do you think the power of language has here? Thank you." Smiley face.
Oh, that's such a wonderful question, Rachel.
Rachel's a wonderful young woman.
Oh, thank you. Damn, I really relate to that, because growing up, I think I also didn't understand like Taiwanese identity as its own singular, powerful identity that is so specific to the long, complicated history of Taiwan. And I think America, yeah, just expected like, well, are you Chinese or not? Just, and I really relate to that. And I'm really sorry that your identity was erased in that way, almost as if for convenience. And I think I'm sad to say I still see it online today. I still see like if someone says Taiwan, like someone will comment, "Don't you mean China?" Or it's like, it's the same thing. And it's really infuriating that this is still, this sort of false discourse is still swirling around us. But yeah, the power of language is so important, because it's not just giving a name. Okay, let's think about this. Language can sometimes be the one thing that stops you from being gaslit, because it's finally naming something that is real. And when it's named, it's put into existence. Now you can write about it, you can share about it, when you talk to other people about it, they can validate you and affirm that's real too. And even like I was thinking about how in 2005 on campus, I don't remember anyone talking about consent. I remember hearing that word much later on, and it's sort of blowing my mind, because now if you're a freshman in college, first day of orientation, this is what consent is. This is how you give it. This is what it looks like. And just that word's existence, like obviously the word consent has always existed, but the way it exists now is new and different. And it's so powerful because it's not just a word anymore. It's a concept of consent as yeah, it's become an antidote against rape culture. And I think about how powerful that is. And I feel sad that when I was a freshman, I didn't know what that word was. And so many of me and my friends just thought like sex was a lot of it was doing things you didn't want to do. Like it just, we didn't even think that it's like, oh, that sucked. Like, haha, like we didn't even grapple with how awful it is to go to college under that culture. And so, no, I totally think language has so much power. And I think it's so important that when we name something, when we name what we are, that's respected, So yeah, I hope moving forward, as we move forward, when we say I'm Taiwanese American, that people will accept that.
Well, you mentioned UCI. And so I wanted to we're going to be out of time soon. I wanted to make sure we had a chance to talk a little bit about what you learned here. I mean, there's so much academic knowledge in this book, right? Like, you know how to write and how to tell a story, but you also know all the stuff about Asian American literature and culture and film and the politics of academia and what a dissertation is, what an archive is. I mean, all this stuff. So I'm really interested in like how much of that you learned here at UCI and how much of it you learned when you went to your graduate programs and fellowships, and kind of just tell us a little bit about your journey as a writer, which also seems to be very uniquely a scholarly journey.
Yeah. UCI was definitely where I discovered both those interests of mine. So it was around, I think, maybe my sophomore, junior year that I decided I wanted to be a professor of English Lit, and this would be my like life goal. And so I took a bunch of independent studies. Like I did one with Richard Godden. Is Richard still at UC?
He just retired.
Oh, good.
Very beloved, very
Yeah.
very important man to so many people.
Yeah, no, he was incredible. And oh my God, how am I blanking on his last name? James, who was the Joycean, Jim, the Joycean, what was his last name?
Oh, James McMichael, the poet.
Yes.
Wonderful man. Yes.
Oh God, yeah. We took an independent study on Ulysses. That was like the only way I managed to read it was with his guidance and talking about it. But that was the first time I got my taste of, oh, what is it like to write these really intense long papers? And then I did an honors thesis with Richard Godden and Ellen Burt as my advisors, and for some reason like killed myself reading. It was like on Derrida and I don't know what, I just like ruined my senior year, because my senior year, instead of just like partying all the time, I was in the library all the time. But I was, preparing for it. It was like, I have to have this as my application to go to grad school. And I was, working on even practicing like what I would research in grad school, like trying to write proposals and things like that. And so I felt honestly really honored that teachers like Richard Godden and James McMichael, that they never treated me like an undergrad in terms of like, let me dumb this down for you, Elaine, or something. They spoke to me really like an equal and just assumed that I could get it. And it was, I think that made me so excited and about academia that, I think I felt starting college, I felt insecure. Like, am I smart enough? Because in high school, that's when I did mess around, and I wasn't like, I was more concerned with, I don't know, getting a boyfriend than school, studying. So when I got to UC, I was like, can I like be at this level? Can I read Ulysses and get it? And it was really, I think I fell in love with academia at that point in my life because it was like this secret society where I could learn these words, these new tools. And I felt smart if I could say I knew, what Derrida was talking about. And I mean, did any of us, but, I at least I like started to learn how to talk in that way and write in that way. And so that was all very thrilling and exciting. And at the same time, I took my first creative writing classes. And I had wonderful teachers from the MFA program who were MFA students, which is so cool having now, I've done an MFA program and taught undergrad students. And it's like, that's so cool. But that was me. And like Kim O'Neill, who teaches in Chicago now, she's an incredible writer, wrote Fever Dogs. She was my teacher, and Michelle Latiolais was my teacher. Yeah, and so all of them, they ignited in me this interest in and discovery of really, I guess the short story form, which I didn't really know and I didn't really have any experience writing with. And I just loved it. I mean, I loved creative writing so much. And I think it, when you love something so much, it's like, it's terrifying. So I completely packed it away and was like, well, this is amazing as a fun elective. Now to get on with my serious career as a, aspiring professor. So I didn't write for 7 years until flash, forward, like studied in France, was doing a PhD in France. I know it makes no sense, but yeah. And then it was when I left academia, and a lot of that was tied to my experiences with France and needing to leave France, that I allowed myself to reopen this box, that I had kept sort of hidden. That was, I guess, when you love something, you're afraid you could fail at it, right? So better not, it's safer to not even try, right? So, but I finally, just tried to take that first step and go back to this form and this art that I loved. So yeah, both of these, that part of my life that was, I was deep in academia for many years, and now, and then studied fiction, and now I'm writing fiction, and all of that started at UCI.
Well, that's so interesting, because I mean, the story of the grad student with her dreaded dissertation, sounds like you have some firsthand knowledge of that. Well, we could keep talking for a really long time because there's so much here. I mean, this could be a movie, it could be a mini series. Remind me of The Chair. There's so much. It's really fun here, but we are out of time. Can you show us the cover of the book one more time?
Oh, sure.
And maybe just in 30 seconds, I know we've got young writers in the audience right now. What's your advice to our undergraduate writers who have a dream but don't know how to realize it? What would you advise them to do?
I would say keep writing and writing for yourself. Try to write like there's no one in the room, because I think when you write with this idea of success or publication, people start entering that room, right? You're no longer alone because you have eyes on you, and you have this, you start to ask, is this good or not? And I think it's so hard to write and not ask that, but I think as much as you can, try to shut out that question and know that it is irrelevant. When you write and you feel, as cheesy as this sound, like whisked away by your imagination, you sort of forget your name, you forget where you are, and you're just in your world, you're just typing it, typing away, lost in this world. That's why we should write, right? As long as you chase that feeling, you're not worrying about anything else but that high of what it feels like to inhabit this world and get carried away literally by your own imagination. Chase that and the rest will come, because I think that having the goal of joy versus success is what sort of makes the difference between success, right? Because it's like, I think success, however we imagine it, it can't be manufactured. It can't be something we sort of, or when people try, it's like, that's awful, you know, because if you just think like, oh, this is what a good, let me try to like copy this. And I definitely tried that with like the first version of the novel, trying to copy what I thought like a book I really loved, The Sellout by Paul Beatty, but then realize, you know, that's not my voice and I can't be Paul Beatty. There's only one Paul Beatty. And so, you know, I think, yeah, when you're at this young age, when it comes to your writing, chase that high, chase the joy, and then also go out and study and experience and work in as many weird, fun things as you can, because I think,
Waffle dog.
huh? Oh, Waffle Dog Factory. Yeah, because you know what's funny? It's like when I've met writers who sometimes they studied creative writing at undergrad, like as just their major, or and then they went straight to an MFA program and they haven't like worked anywhere. You know, I just feel like sometimes it felt like they didn't know what to write about. But then I would know writers who, you know, had spent 10 years working in social care. And they had so many stories, people who had worked, who had traveled and had all these life stories from that. You know, I just think if you, we so much of writing is informed by what we've experienced and lived, what we've seen. The bigger your world is, the bigger I think your writing can be. So I think don't get anxious about like, oh, because right now I'm studying like chemistry or anthropology or psychology that I can't be a writer. No, that's going to make you a better writer. That's going to make you more interesting.
I really feel that in your work, that you have this broader view
Exactly.
of academia beyond creative writing.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we're out of time. It has been so wonderful to see you again, to reconnect, to have you return to the campus. We're just very proud of you, and we look forward to the miniseries, the film, or the next novel. So keep us posted about your plans. I want to thank our great audience as well.
Thank you so much,
everybody.
Julia. Thank you.
Elaine.